Hi everyone, I'm going to talk about taking healthcare out of the hospital. So I'm going to start by setting the scene. I'll describe some technologies which are enabling this trend. I'll outline some of the challenges it poses and conclude by describing the importance of good design in addressing some of these challenges. So there's been a gradual shift over the last decade towards more provision of healthcare outside of the clinical environment. And unsurprisingly, we saw an acceleration of this during the pandemic, when in-person care was no longer an option. Post-pandemic, it appears that we're settling into a more hybrid model where we've seen that things that seemed impractical before the pandemic can be done remotely. We've seen less digitally native users not struggle with adopting new technology. For example, many of our parents and grandparents are happy to scan a QR code and share data if they feel it's going to be beneficial to their health. But we've also had some valuable reminders of some scenarios where you really can't replace face-to-face interactions with trained healthcare professionals. For example, helping people cope with injection anxiety. In the last 10 to 15 years, we've seen a growth of technologies coming to market which enable this shift to a more hybrid model of healthcare. And today, I'm going to give a couple of great examples of technologies that we here at Team have worked on, which focus on tasks that would traditionally have been carried out in hospitals or labs, but that now can be performed on the high street or in the home. In each case, it was important we created a user interface that was incredibly easy to use. And to do that, we really needed to understand the context and scenarios of use and test our ideas with users. Pardon me. My first example is this smartphone-enabled otoscope we helped develop for Timper Health. So they're a company started by an ENT surgeon from the NHS. Now, currently, the pathway to receiving diagnosis and treatment for hearing loss can be quite disjointed and relatively inaccessible. The average waiting time for patients to receive treatment pre-COVID was 12 to 16 weeks, and it's now grown substantially, which carries a significant risk of patient dropout and the potential for the condition to worsen before it's treated. To compound the problem, GPs have also stopped offering wax removal as a service, which has a significant impact on access and well-being. The Timper system provides a means of conducting wax removal, a hearing check, and a digital ear examination all in a single 30-minute appointment, significantly reducing the time it takes to obtain a diagnosis and receive treatment. It makes use of a smartphone camera to take high-definition images and videos of the ear, which can then be shared with an ENT surgeon or audiologist if a second opinion is required. And it also includes a light and a microsuction device for removing wax. So why is this interesting? So importantly, this device enables clinicians to provide hearing assessments outside of a clinical environment, for example, in a high street pharmacy. Post-pandemic, many are still reluctant to attend appointments in clinic, especially for conditions that carry a stigma such as hearing loss, hearing and sight loss, and sexual health issues. This device removes the barriers to getting a quick referral and diagnosis by making it easy for patients to attend a single 30-minute appointment on their high street. The system is designed to be simple and intuitive to use, so the procedure can be performed by less well-trained individuals. It's therefore a really good example of a technology that democratizes healthcare, i.e. it puts the right technology and support in the hands of more healthcare professionals and providers, increasing accessibility and reducing the number of hospital and GP appointments required by patients. So I'm going to return to how we approach the challenge of creating such a simple user interface later on. My second example of an enabling technology is a diagnostic device we helped develop for Lumira DX. So traditionally, diagnostic tests for markers such as D-dimer, CRP, and INR would be conducted in a centralized lab and a variety of different instruments. And this requires patient samples to be ferried to the lab from hospitals and GP surgeries, where they're processed by skilled technicians before returning a result. We can all remember the anxiety we faced taking a COVID test early in the pandemic and waiting for the result to come through on our phone from the lab. And that anxiety multiplies when it's a complex health condition where decisions need to be made very quickly. The Lumira DX provides a wide variety of lab quality diagnostic tests at the point of care, be it the patient's bedside or in a high street pharmacy or in the home, or even in a resource poor setting. This enables users to make faster, more accurate decisions on diagnosis and treatment, reducing anxiety and improving healthcare outcomes. A major goal for the device was to obtain the lowest FDA categorization for the complexity of diagnostic tests, known as a CLIA waiver. CLIA stands for Clinical Laboratory Improvement Amendments. Tests that are waived are approved for use in the widest variety of settings, including the home. And achieving a CLIA waiver requires that usability is a key driver in the development of a diagnostic device. Again, I'll return to how we approach this later on. So my first two examples are focused on devices designed for use by clinicians and pharmacists. But now let's talk about some examples of asking patients to do something typically done by an HCP. Take, for example, home auto-injection systems for a condition like rheumatoid arthritis. Traditionally, a patient could be instructed in first use of an auto-injector by an HCP, who would be able to provide patients with additional support with things like injection pain and the need to rotate the injection site. So increasingly, patients are expected to self-train and may have to rely solely on written instructions to learn how to use their device. In reality, we know that people either don't read their instructions or don't follow the steps correctly. And this has been a big driving factor for the simplification of use steps in modern auto-injectors. So many follow a simple two-step process of remove cap and hold against skin. So while this has reduced the opportunity for use error, it's come at the expense of device complexity. In some instances, patients may be provided with a training device like the one you can see on screen, which allows them to practice injection without wasting valuable drug or using a needle, although this can be expensive for pharmaceutical companies. So especially when you factor in all the additional support previously provided by the HCP, we're asking much more of our devices. And this has pushed device developers to look beyond the device itself to other elements of the ecosystem, such as the packaging, quick reference guide, and even companion apps. The example on screen is a flipbook packaging solution that walks users through the features of the injector pen before they've even removed it from the packaging. And it also primes the user for how the device is going to be held through illustrations. The packaging can include a QR code and a call to action to prompt them to engage with digital training content on a companion app. This has the potential to be more dynamic, think videos, and perhaps even tailored to the needs of the individual. The challenge here is encouraging users to engage with digital content by understanding their desires, motivations, and unmet needs. And this comes down to performing good contextual research from the outset and testing ideas often with the target user group. Of course, the benefits of a smart device go beyond training. Sensors enable the recording of usage data, which can be shared with HCPs to ensure users are adhering to their treatment. Users can also access more general information and support around managing their condition. Another area where smart devices are proving to be useful is in the decentralization of clinical trials. As the name suggests, these would typically be conducted in a clinical setting and would therefore limit the number and type of participants pharma companies could engage with. Additionally, what people say they'll do in a clinical trial and what they actually do in reality can be very different. Smart devices enable clinical trials to be conducted over longer periods of time in the participant's home environment. This gives pharma companies much greater access to patients, especially more vulnerable cohorts who would previously have been excluded from attending a clinical setting, for example, cystic fibrosis patients. It also provides more confidence that the data collected is representative of reality. In short, they get much better data and much more of it, which hopefully leads to more safe and effective treatments. Even something as simple as an asthma inhaler poses significant challenges in terms of self-training and adherence, as the delivery technique is critical. With PMDIs, like the one on screen, users really struggle with coordinating the button press with inhalation, with the result that most of the drug is often just deposited on the back of the throat, which can lead to further complications. Inhaler spacers, which are plastic tubes which are attached to the mouthpiece, go some way to addressing the coordination issue, but they require cleaning. So this is also, again, this comes down to, this has driven innovations in inhaler design, such as breath actuation, where the plume of drug isn't released until the user starts inhaling. But again, this comes at the price of increased device complexity. Again, big pharma companies are looking at the advantages that smart devices can bring, such as dose tracking, training support, and connecting patients to HCPs. However, the same challenges exist as with auto-injectors, i.e., what will motivate users to engage with digital content. So I've given a few examples of technologies which are enabling this move to a more hybrid model of healthcare. Hopefully you can see some themes emerging. While they provide several benefits, such as improved access, faster, more accurate diagnoses, reduced burden on the healthcare system, and ultimately better healthcare outcomes, they place a greater burden on the device itself. And we have to think very carefully about what we're losing by taking something out of the hands of an experienced HCP. Ultimately, it's about developing devices which people can and want to use, which are simple, intuitive, and safe. And this is easier said than done. The key, as I've already alluded to, is understanding underlying behaviors and beliefs and identifying unmet needs. It's then developing simple, elegant solutions and testing them frequently with target stakeholders along the journey. So I'm going to talk a bit now about how we go about doing that. So if we begin by talking about behaviors, at Team, we like to begin the process by conducting contextual research. So in the case of a diagnostics platform we developed, we visited labs, GP surgeries, hospitals, and pharmacies in 3 global locations. This ensures we capture regional differences and gather insights from all the stakeholders, which for even a simple medical device may include patients, carers, HCPs, buyers, and the regulator. Next, we create a user journey map, like the one shown here. So we'll map the use steps and highlight the pain points in the journey. That's areas of friction where improvements can be made. And if there are multiple stakeholders involved, this is where you can identify conflicting requirements. We can then identify and prioritize key design challenges, which we express as how might we statements. For example, how might we reduce the number of steps required to take a test? In this way, our concepting activity is directly informed by the insights we've gathered. Our next rule of thumb is to get things into the hands of users early and as often as we can to learn as much as possible as quickly as we can and iterate the design. This can range from simple foam handling models to fully functional demonstrators. This is an approach we used on the Timper otoscope that I mentioned earlier. So we learned by speaking to the clinicians that the weight of the phone was an issue, and we were able to quickly mock up foam handling models so we could experiment with moving the phone closer to the operator's wrist. And we also added we also improved the ergonomics by creating a hinged handle, which could better accommodate both left and right-handed users. The clinicians also fed back that they needed better illumination and magnification. So we added a light to the tip of the otoscope and a series of lenses to augment the phone's camera. It also became clear there was a need to recharge the phone between sessions. So we introduced a charging dock, which also acted as a home for the device in the pharmacy. As we start to converge on a design, we tend to organise more formal observational studies with the help of our human factors colleagues. These give us the opportunity to explore specific aspects of device use in more detail and try to understand the root cause of an issue. So we've learned a lot of shortcuts over the years. Early in the development of a diagnostics instrument, we wanted to explore how the user would navigate the physical user strip interface, as well as the on-screen UI. And this was long before the software had even been written. So our device was literally just an empty box. So our approach was to embed a smartphone inside the model, which we'd loaded with an interactive prototype UI. And we were able to control the phone from the back room during the user study, so we could advance the UI screen when the HCP performed an action like inserting a test strip. We even went to the level of detail of simulating the insertion force for the strips using a tunable spring clamp, so it was as close as possible to us simulating the final end user experience. We also used eye tracking technology to better understand how the users navigated the system. So you can barely see here, but this chap's wearing a pair of special glasses. So this meant we could play back the recording at a later date to understand what the user was focusing on if they had an issue. So all these techniques come together to give a really rich picture of the user's expectations and their comprehension of the system. and it means we can base all our design decisions on first-hand evidence. Sometimes a complicated challenge can't be solved through the device design alone. So we have to start looking at the packaging, information design, digital design, and even service design to achieve the desired outcome. A good example would be a sample application method for a point-of-care diagnostic device we developed. So unlike most cartridge-based systems, this instrument required that the user apply a sample after it had been inserted into the instrument. And even with clear instructions, we found in early testing, users found it very difficult to break away from the mental model of applying a sample to the strip off instrument. So to tackle this, we designed the packaging, the instructions for use, the quick reference guide, all to carry a large image of the instrument at the moment someone is applying a sample. And the instrument UI also included clear animations of use steps. So each of these touch points provided little nudges which together work to guide the user towards the desired behavior. So in summary then, there's a shift towards a provision of healthcare outside the hospital. And this puts an extra burden on devices and users to perform tasks previously carried out by skilled HCPs, which means we need to take a more user-centric approach to device design. We do this by exploring user beliefs and behaviors and identifying key design challenges. We test our ideas early and often with key stakeholders, and we use the full ecosystem to nudge the user towards the desired behavior.
Do you have to have a healthcare professional in the design team to understand user needs?
It's very helpful to have access to the specialists who are involved in the process that you're working on. So we don't have healthcare professionals in the group here at Team, but often through our clients, we can get access to the relevant people, or we also work with third-party recruitment agencies for a user study, say, to find the participants we need to get that crucial stakeholder feedback that I was talking about earlier. So it's something we definitely like to bake into the design process.
Excellent. And then on a similar note, so is there a clear set of rules about which specific tasks patients can be expected to do? I suppose this is per project. Is it always a case-by-case basis? And would such guidance be useful if it was developed academically, for example?
Didn't quite follow the question, Jack. Could you repeat it? Sorry.
Yes, of course. So is there a clear set of rules about the specific tasks that patients are expected to do on a case-by-case basis?
Well, I suppose it varies very much depending on the device and the task you're trying to perform. Obviously, our ultimate goal is to have an approved medical device, and quite often, well, all of the time, the regulator will require you to show that you have tested your device with a representative user group. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, of course. And so moving to another question. So what is the key difference in the development of devices for medical personnel in the clinic versus home use?
Well, I think that kind of harks back to my answer to the last question. So the regulator will want to see that you have tested the device in the final environment of use, be that in a lab or in the home. So that means you're going to have to make sure, I've already spoken about a trend towards perhaps moving some tasks into the hands of less skilled users. So that suggests you're going to have to work on a design which is very intuitive and very difficult to get wrong. So ultimately, it's that need to prove use in the final end environment that creates a different process along the way, because we'll obviously be testing with different user groups than we would if we were, say, designing a piece of lab equipment which was only ever going to be used by trained lab technicians.
Thanks for that. And we've had another question. Are telemedicine and decentralized clinical trials as effective in terms of data quality and quantity?
That's a very difficult question for us to answer, because our involvement in remote clinical trials is well, we tend to not get involved in remote clinical trials. We obviously get involved in sometimes our human factors colleagues will get involved in clinical trials in a clinical setting so that we can act as observers. But if they're taking place in the users' homes, we don't get access to that information. So really, that's a bit outside of our experience. That would really be a question for the pharmaceutical companies. But I think what we can say, and as I alluded to earlier, is that by doing a remote trial, you can access patients who you definitely couldn't have accessed previously. So I mentioned vulnerable cohorts, but I know another big benefit to remote clinical trials is that you can perhaps access minority groups who previously wouldn't have been, able to attend a trial. Our HF colleagues sometimes see people driving for 2 hours to take place in a trial, and some people, won't have access to, won't be able to do that easily. So you can access people in more resource poor settings, say, or different demographics.
Okay, interestingly, actually, talking of different demographics, sorry, we had another question come in. Someone's asked, as these products might be addressed to people around the world, how do you deal with cultural differences so that the products suit everybody?
Good question. So we'll often ask, quite frequently our clients will say, well, this is going to be a global launch. And our next question is, well, which regions are you prioritizing? And so once we know that prioritization, we will quite often try and set up contextual research in those locations. So I already mentioned with that diagnostic project, we did testing in the US and the EU to understand the regional differences. Sometimes if we're working with people in non-English speaking countries, then we'll have to work with a partner organization out there who'll perhaps include translators, and then we'll have to spend the time, we always do a lot of preparation for our contextual research and preparing stimulus material. So we'll have to prepare versions of it in different languages, for example. So the answer to the question is that we go out and try and find stakeholders from those different groups.
Excellent. So changing tack slightly, someone else has asked, beyond diabetes and inhalers, what are the other remote smart drug delivery successes?
One that springs to mind, there's a Merck device which has been on the market for a very long time. I think it's called EasyPod, and it's for children who take a growth hormone therapy. And there's quite a lot of information out there about the success of that device, that connected device, in improving adherence. So basically, the device allows the user to tune the injections so they can potentially experience, have a more comfortable injection experience. You can pre-program the doses, so you don't have to think every time you go to turn the device on. It's got a nice UI screen on there, so it can walk children through the injection step by step. So that, I think, is a good success story. Propeller Health, who've developed a small capsule-based dry powder inhaler, they did a variant which had a connected smart module. So that was good from the patient point of view, because there's no connecting there's no having to assemble your device with a smart element. They came pre-assembled, so from the user's point of view, it's just another inhaler. So I think that's been quite successful. There are quite a lot of there's technology entering the market more frequently around RFID on labels, RFID tags on labels, so you can monitor adherence through a label being torn. It's early days for that one to actually say whether or not it's a success story, but yes, we're certainly seeing a prevalence of that starting to enter the market. So those are the top ones that kind of spring to mind.
Excellent. And we've just had another question in, it's quite topical. How is AI, or how will AI be incorporated into the design process?
Well, we have actually experimented with it a bit in the design team, asking it to do some inhaler designs for us, and it's pretty remarkable what it comes back with. But you know, it's all very superficial at the moment. I think it goes very skin deep right now. There's potential it could be useful early on, just when you're, you know, if you look at the typical design process where you sort of go broad and then you converge back in on a solution. Sure, early in the process where you're looking to come up with a wide variety of ideas and take inspiration from lots of different sources, I could see some potential for it. But like I say, we've got an approach here at Team which we've built on for years, which is evidence-based, and it's all about going out and speaking to people and trying to understand the root causes of problems. And I suspect UI is quite a long way from being able to take over from us, if you like.
Of course.
At least that's my hope.
Everyone's hoping. Brilliant. And we've just had another question. How early on in the design process do you integrate IP professionals?
So the answer to that question is that we normally, with our clients, IP is all handled by them. So we're an entirely fees for service company. Any IP generated during the project will belong to the client, and it's the client's responsibility to conduct IP searches if they think it will be useful. You know, what our obligation is to, if we see a potential concept route which looks like there might be some overlap with another technology which is aware of, then we'll flag that to the client. But that's really as far as it goes for us. And if the client wants us to support them in doing IP searches, then we'd probably work with an external partner anyway.
Okay, and then someone's asked, I suppose, more of a general question on this topic. What do you think the time scale is to fully equip end users outside of the hospital? Are we looking at like 1 year, 10 years?
Okay, I'm going to assume that the question is more, do I think there's a difference between developing a product for a clinical setting versus home use? My answer to the question is no, I don't think there is. You're going through the same process. I think that, as I've already mentioned, the regulator is going to require that you demonstrate that you've tested your device with the target user group. And I think whether it's at home or in a clinic, I don't see a significant difference there.